Hello, everyone. My name is Tekquiree, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we are going to be talking about turning stress into strength, your mind as medicine with the one and only Brenda Stockdale. Brenda is a nationally recognized pioneer in the field of applied psycho-neuroimmunology, also known as P&I. She was the National Program Director for Bernie Siegel's ECAP organization, and the program she designed was accepted by the Chief Oncologist and President of the American Cancer Society at Helen and Harry Grace Cancer Center in New England. Her flagship program has been nationally recognized, running in cancer centers for 2 decades, and is featured in her book, You Can Beat the Odds: Surprising Factors Behind Chronic Illness and Cancer. She's been featured in multiple national media channels, including The Oprah Winfrey Show, O Magazine, Good Housekeeping, ABC News, and more. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you, Tekquiree, for having me. It's always a treat to be with you. And one of the things I appreciate the most is how you're really shining a light on the science around thriving. So it's more than just survivorship. We're really talking about thriving. So thanks for doing this for us.
I cannot wait to get into this because I am so excited to address these new findings. So what is psycho-neuroimmunology, also known as P&I?
Well, it's kind of a fancy term for, colloquially, we are calling it mind-body medicine frequently. It's really about the interface between our personal neurobiology, our immune system, our circulatory system, and even our gut, the enteric nervous system. And all of these communicate with each other, and even our genes participate in this conversation. So it's a whole body experience, and the way we think and the way we feel have powerful effects not only on our immune cells, but even, as I mentioned, on our genes, gene expression.
Wow. So you said before that our body's been engineered really as a conversation.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that. To me, that really says it all. The conversation is happening throughout all our nervous system, our cells, our tissues on every level. It just so happens, for example, that the emotional center of your brain releases these neuropeptides, different chemicals. They're shaped like keys, and they literally interlock to the backbone of your immune system. So this little monocyte, a microscopic white blood cell, has all these key-shaped little openings all around the outside.
Wow.
And each one of those key-shaped openings only fits one biological from the emotional area of your brain. So literally how you're thinking and feeling is interlocking into that backbone of your immunity and affecting the way these white blood cells behave. So when I was in school, they had identified, I think, 70 of these, and now there's over 500. So you can just imagine that this little white blood cell has hundreds of openings, and each of those fits just one biological. And they find each other because they do kind of a shimmy from the interior grooves of that door lock, so to speak, on that monocyte with those brain chemicals. So they literally lock into each other. But it's especially exciting because your gut participates in the conversation too. It just so happens the lining of your intestines, the enteric nervous system, is one of the richest receptor sites in the human body for these brain chemicals. So we have a phrase, gut feeling.
Yes.
Right. But it's really a biological event. So not only does the communication go from the emotional part of the brain to these body systems, including your cardiovascular system that has receptor sites as well for these emotional brain chemicals, but it also goes back up, meaning those white blood cells are actually secreting their own biological that goes back up to the emotional center of your mind. So it's not really mind over matter, it's mind and matter affecting each other. But the pharmacy in our mind is really what is behind a lot of the upcoming fascinating findings.
Wow. So is this how then as far as the conversation, how does that affect our health? Is this how it affects our health?
This is in part how it can affect our health.
Okay.
So because the way we think and feel in any given moment is kind of driving a whole host of biological reactions. I can give a couple of examples. One, maybe a trivial example would be that it just so happens that we can predict the likelihood of catching a cold based on your emotional experience.
Mm.
But we also know more profoundly that something as insubstantial as a thought can actually generate new nerve tissue in the brain. And as I mentioned, change the course of our white blood cells. Thankfully, we've got all these advances in technology that let us peer into thoughts, behaviors, and emotional states so we can track their effects on the body. And because of that, we're actually able to identify skills, techniques, and behaviors that have been shown to influence things we never thought we could, like hormones, blood pressure, and again, gene expression, just from practicing some of these methods. The good news, I should say the upshot for all of us here, is that the evidence is so huge that insurers now offer codes for the reimbursement of these methods for infertility, pain, cancer, lupus, arthritis, fibromyalgia, diabetes, you name it.
That's awesome.
Yes, these collectively, all these techniques and methods have been shown to lower all-cause mortality and improve outcome for most any disease. But the problem is that these this is not information that's well disseminated. Some of the methods are poorly understood outside of research fields. I was actually speaking at a continuing medical education conference for physicians, and I asked for a show of hands how many people were familiar with these codes. And I only had one guy raise his hand, and it was my husband. So part of the job description is to kind of get the word out, and that's why I think what you're doing is so important, because it's real science, real methods, and we just need more people to be aware of it.
One of the concepts that I find fascinating that you talk about is how DNA reacts to not only the food that we eat, but also what we think.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because as we've talked about the body being engineered as a conversation, DNA plays a part in this. And we know that the DNA we inherit from our parents is fixed, but the way it's actually expressed is not. And scientists, geneticists in particular, had been mystified by why you could have identical twins and they could grow up to look a little differently from each other. They could have different diseases, age at different rates. And so you're wondering, how is this possible when they have the exact same DNA? Well, when epigenetics came on the scene, Bruce Lipton, who's a Stanford geneticist and biologist, explains that while that DNA is fixed that we inherit, it just so happens that there's a coating on the cover of this gene that acts as an antenna, and it scans the environment and translates what it finds into proteins that then regulate genetic expression. So in his workshops, he asks the question, what regulates gene expression? And he has a slide and it reads, it's the environment, stupid. And so you mentioned that the environment includes what we eat, it includes the toxins we're exposed to, but it also includes how we think, how we feel, the way we respond to stress. It's been found that job stress, depression, and the way we were treated as children are potent immunologic and genetic modifiers. So we're very interested in making sure we get underneath the science to really understand how we can personally benefit. And many times that means healing the past in the present to the degree that we can.
That's so deep when I think about that. Like, there's so many layers to that.
So many layers.
Oh, it just got me thinking. I'm just thinking about just so many different things. I mean, we're all like healing from so many different things.
Yeah.
So in your book, you talk about Gary. Can you share with us the story about Gary?
I love Gary for so many reasons. I'm glad you do too. I like his story. I was a clinical assistant at Getting Well, which was a hospital-based applied secondary immunology program. And that's where I learned that there is this huge and beautiful science that is available to all of us, but that there's not one right way to heal. Mm. So I had many teachers, and one of those was Gary, who's a 13-year-old boy, and his brain tumor had become inoperable. He was paralyzed, his legs were paralyzed. He was blind in one eye. He would put his tummy on a skateboard to navigate around the house. And his doctors told his parents he didn't have long to live. But one day his father heard something about our program, and he asked Gary if he'd be interested in attending. And he said, sure, he'd check it out. So they brought him into the program. But of course, it just so happened that there was a whole group of only postmenopausal women in Getting Well at that period of time. So I felt he just said, I don't know if I can do this. You really can't blame him, you know. He said, I've got to think about this. I don't know.
Right, 13.
I know, 13-year-old boy, all these older women. So he wakes up the next day and he says, yes, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to give it everything I've got. And he did. He participated fully in stress management. He brought his own thoughts and feelings to discussions on finding meaning in illness. He didn't try to dodge art therapy. And if it's okay with you, I'll talk about the medical imagery he did. Is that?
Yes, absolutely. Please share.
I love this part. He was really into, he had a video sensibility. And so he imagined his tumor to be a big, stupid, evil planet. And he imagined his immune cells as these fancy rockets, and just pulverizing this planet. And gradually, his tumor began to shrink. He regained the vision in his eye, first the use of one leg, then the other. He went back to school. I know. And when he was 16, all the local media came out to film him getting his driver's license. And the doctors told him, Gary, your tumor is now flat as a pancake and about to be reabsorbed by the body. Later, after high school and college, he was completely cancer-free, and he and our program was featured in National Geographic's Healing Miracles in the Mind. So I love this story for so many reasons, but it really highlights the area of the brain that makes something like this possible is the limbic brain, the limbic system. And in this magical area of the brain, sight, sounds, and feelings are translated with lightning speed into a chemical reality that affects every nerve, every cell, and every fiber of your being. So when he was doing that medical imagery, from a biological perspective, it was indistinguishable from the actual event. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Like I have chills. I actually really want to cry whenever I hear his story. And the power of being able to do that. You know what I mean? No one. It's just so powerful what you do, because no one really thinks about how their mind, imagining these types of things, the effect that it has on your body. You know what I mean? It's so powerful.
Right. We're always doing it. We're always using this. It's an innate technology. Think about biting into a juicy lemon. Mm-hmm. Just imagining that, right? Or your favorite dessert.
Yes.
And then you can think about blushing. I'm an easy blusher. All it takes is one sentence and my face is totally red because my capillaries have expanded to a word or a thought before the person's even finished their sentence. And then there's, it could be a hot August day in Atlanta, but the hair on your arm could stand straight up if someone tells you an awesome story, like you mentioned the chills you just had. So these are physical, palpable reactions to thoughts, words, and images, but it's happening on a microscopic level all day long. And our job is really, how do we get underneath that? I mean, Hollywood, has been taking advantage of this for decades.
Yes.
It's called the willful suspension of disbelief. And so if you're going to buy into the story, if you're getting that buy-in, your heart can race. If the movie's a thriller, right?
Yep.
You can feel like these people. We can cry. So these are all ways this area of the brain is always interpreting what's happening around us in very specific ways that releases a bunch of chemicals. I don't know if you're up for it, but we could try for maybe 60 seconds if you want to do a little brief imagery.
Of course.
Does that seem okay?
I do. Look, I'm like getting in my chair, like getting ready.
We're trying to get all relaxed. So if it's okay with you, let's just have you go to any place you like. I know you're from California.
Yeah.
I want to keep you in Atlanta. So
okay.
but maybe I should let you visit California in your mind, just as long as you don't leave us. Move and go back there. But you can pick any ocean scene or mountain scene, anything you like.
Yes. Okay. It's the beach already.
All right. Okay. So we're at the beach. And I'd like for you to just notice, first of all, the time of day. Whether it's morning, afternoon, or dusk. Maybe how your clothes feel against your body. The feel of the air, it might be humid, or maybe if there's a dry breeze. And then the sand, noticing whether it's firm or moist, how it feels beneath your feet. The sound of the ocean, the aroma of the sea, sound of the birds, textures, and really how it feels to be there. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes if you want to come back. So when you were doing that, there were some chemical changes that took place, and your auditory cortex was stimulated when you imagined the sounds. Your sensory cortex, when you imagine feeling the sand, and your visual cortex as you imagine that scene. Now, each of these areas of the brain sent an immediate message to your limbic brain that then sent out a chemical message to all the cells and tissues of your body. So biochemically, it's as if you were really there. The Mayo Clinic newsletter sent something to all their subscribers saying, we should all be taking advantage of this every day for prevention, for treatment. Martin Rossman is a wonderful physician. He's partnered with Blue Cross Blue Shield on studies. One pre-surgical regimen included imagery, and he said if the same effect could be had with a pharmaceutical, it would be routinely prescribed as a part of every pre-surgical regimen. So this isn't just woo-woo. There's actual real medicine involved in what you're engaging in, right? It's real science, it's cool stuff. Duke University calls it the new medicine. Being able to really use our imagination to help partner our body with what we want to experience.
I love that so much. Like, okay, so for one, how you were talking about when you hear a story, sometimes like the hairs on your arm stand up. When I open my eyes, like I could feel like all of this is like as if I was there. Like maybe it was the breeze, I don't know, but I felt it like as if I was like really there, and the part you're talking about. So I've been meditating more to really just be peaceful. And it's been working, and like it helps. Like it's just amazing that just talking to God, it's like changes everything. And I'm like, how come I wasn't doing this before like this?
Right. And I'm so glad you mentioned this and the way you just used it and what you experienced, because there's a mistaken belief that it takes a lot of time. And Ulosh Kaplan and Gerald Epstein did a remarkable study showing that we're talking seconds to achieve a shift. And that they examined they used the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve it's like the superhighway from your emotional brain to your physiology. So it's a cranial nerve. It innervates the heart. It takes notes on all your abdominal organs. It sends the information back up to the brain, and vice versa. It's why you can get butterflies in your stomach. You might feel nauseous if you're nervous. Complements the vagus nerve. But vagal tone, the shape of our vagus nerve is predictive of longevity. So in Epstein and Kaplan's study, this brief imagery was positively influencing the vagus nerve.
Wow.
So you're doing good things for your body when you just take 30 seconds and just imagine yourself in a beautiful scene or a meaningful moment or taking in a beautiful part of nature into your heart.
Yeah. That's interesting you say that too, because back when I was going through treatment, especially like after I was diagnosed, I would always imagine being in nature. Like I had this huge desire to connect with nature. Like I just wanted to be in nature, and I just wanted to be alone with God. And maybe that's just what my body was telling me I needed to uplift me and to get out of this, the state that we can be in after we hear about a diagnosis.
Yes. And that's interesting too, because new findings are showing that being in nature is accomplishing a lot.
Mhm.
So there's even chemicals released from plants and trees and other organisms that are communicating with each other. And we don't know all the effects they have on us, on our biology. It's kind of a new, exciting venture to investigate, but we're really wired to participate in nature. It's part of what brings joy and meaning to our hearts. So even I know we just finished having a week of rain and overcast here in Atlanta and some chilly temperatures. And so we can use our imagination to bring a little bit of maybe those other meaningful moments into our life.
Yes.
There's been even an interesting investigation as a segue for depression, treatment for depression has been 30 seconds taking in 3 good things. The study was actually just 20 seconds, but for my clients and patients I work with, I usually just say, just go for 30 seconds. But you're taking in 3 good things. So when we focus on nature and really bring those 3 great sunsets or moon rises or moments that we're really experiencing that oneness with the planet, just 30 seconds of that has been shown to release GABA, a calming neurotransmitter. It actually stops the ruminating part of your brain from spinning. And in 3 weeks, it was shown to be more effective than standard psychotherapy and traditional treatment for mild and moderately depressed individuals, not for clinically depressed folks, but for mild and moderately depressed, that daily intervention had that kind of an effect.
Wow. And you said something that's very powerful, that I just keep thinking about is we don't know the effects that nature has on us. Like I never thought about that until you said it. Even though I love the sunset, I love being on the beach, I love like just being outside.
Yes.
But there's a reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not even thinking about like even the birds or just seeing different things, the positive effects that it's having on me.
Yes,
That's our.
we feel it.
Can you touch on how depression is involved in cancer and other health issues?
Oh, yes, that's an important thing for us to mention. Raisin and Miller have really shown us that hippocampal volume, that's the size of your hippocampus, and pro-inflammatory cytokines, those are inflammatory molecules that are a special type of inflammatory molecule, that together they are predictive of cancer, cardiovascular disease, depression, and diabetes. So when we look at that, we're seeing the effects of what happens in the brain and with these inflammatory molecules as a result of chronic stress. Now, it also gets interesting when we talk about depression in terms of cancer, because the tumor microenvironment actually produces its own molecules, these pro-inflammatory cytokines that actually induce depression, even if the person was not depressed before the diagnosis.
Wow.
So we have a bit of a conundrum because folks go to the doctor, they're diagnosed, and he says, well, of course you're depressed. You just had this, but this can be something else. This is an endogenous depression secondary to the tumor microenvironment. So the risk is that depression is a risk factor for spread in cancer. So it's an independent risk factor. So we really want to look at this holistically and make sure we're addressing depression. And some of the things we talked about earlier, the exercise of taking in the good, really it can be useful in treating depression, and obviously efforts that we take toward impacting chronic stress. We don't want to be in chronic stress because that can make it actually make it worse.
Yeah. Well, so there's stress, right? And I know that you talked about chronic stress, and I know there's also acute stress. So what's the difference between a chronic and acute stress? Because we just think of stress as stress.
Right. Well, Charles Grayson, who I mentioned earlier, who really is the one who helped us to understand a lot about hippocampal volume and pro-inflammatory cytokines being predictive of some of these things. He, and his workshops, takes an unsuspecting person, and he said, what would happen if I just came up with a knife and I stabbed you in the arm? And people were like totally shocked that he's saying this, right? But of course, they're going to go to the hospital, avoid him, call the police, and get treatment, right? So they're going to be okay. But he said, on the other hand, what if I came up to you and I just started rubbing your shoulder? And I just never stopped. Eventually, that arm would not function. The effects would be devastating. And so we're looking at this acute response versus a chronic response. Bringing this home to me and you, what this means in everyday life is that we don't want to start thinking of stress as bad. There's a more nuanced version or vision of stress we want to hold in our hearts and in our minds, because stress can save your life. Mm-hmm. So if you really are running from a creepy stranger in a dark parking garage or a tiger, we want you to have a robust stress response. Yeah. We want that immune mobilization. Inflammation is going to ramp up. We're going to have platelet aggregation. That means your platelets are going to get sticky. Insulin's going to flood your body, so you have glucose, plenty of glucose to keep you running. Digestion will stop. It's brilliant. These are elegant, efficient responses to help you survive. You may not bleed to death. You won't be wasting energy digesting food. It works for us. But as Raisin illustrates, what's working for us on the short term is working against us on the long term. It's disastrous on the long term, actually, because when chronic stress, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to know what happens if you think about your platelets getting all clumpy all day long, right? Yeah. After day, week after week, we can see what happens with the microbiome. Digestion. Your intestinal villi need to be able to function to absorb all those nutrients. In chronic stress, they don't. So we might be on all these fancy diets, we might be taking lots of supplements, but chronic stress lowers circulating antioxidants to such a degree, we can't supplement enough. Yeah. It increases natural killer cells, dysregulates the autonomic nervous system. Obviously, we talked about insulin issues, type 2 diabetes. Mm-hmm. Nobody needs to have that kind of clotting issues, circulatory problems. And then there's even aging. So the telomeres our little biomarkers of aging, and their end caps of the chromosomes actually shrink with age. But if we're under chronic stress for a prolonged period of time, we can actually have biological aging that doesn't match our chronological age. So those shrink and open the door to disease. So and negative gene expression, meaning the genes that would normally come to your rescue are downregulated with chronic stress. So the goal here isn't, I know I'm sounding like stress is bad, aren't I? But the goal here isn't stress is evil or bad. It's that we want to kind of shift our perspective so it can work for us and not against us.
Yeah. That's interesting too, how, our actual age, like we could be a different age. You called that, what did you call that? You called it.
Chronological aging versus biological aging. We could be,
Yes.
yeah.
Crazy.
Right. It helps us understand more about why identical twins
Yeah.
might play over time, depending on this. So the good news, though, is that we can meet this challenge.
Mhm.
And the first step is to understand or recognize if we've become habituated to chronic stress, where we're not even really noticing it anymore. I know you and I have talked, and you know that I'm the stress management expert. So I am someone who really needs to practice what I preach and remind myself of these things regularly.
Yeah.
I think Kelly McGonigal's work at Harvard is super important right now because she's really highlighted that changing up how we're defining stress is changing the way the body reacts. So if we label something a challenge,
Yes.
yep, it's different than if we're saying, oh, I'm so stressed. So we want to make sure that we're adopting a point of view that's in our best interest, because we want to take advantage of fight, flight, or freeze when it's appropriate. But a lot of what we're dealing with is just the slings and arrows of everyday life.
Yes.
And it can become undetected, habituated levels of chronic stress. And when we unpack that, that's when we really upgrade our biology significantly.
I love that. And I love that you are confirming all of what I'm feeling, like the things that you're telling us to do, because I used to be I could get like so overwhelmed by little things. And I was just talking to my husband about this. Like, these are like little things. Why am I like, stressing over it? And I've learned to just breathe and let it go, and everything will just align how it's supposed to align. I know when to take action, when I'm supposed to take action. And I'm like, where did this come from? So now I'm thinking about, like, how did I become that person that would get so overwhelmed by just everyday life, little things? Like, why?
Exactly. And some of it has to do with our temperament, our personality.
Yeah.
We're type A, we're a bit of a perfectionist. If we're kind of hard on ourselves, we're running ourselves, we're going to have to work harder than our laid back girlfriends.
Yeah.
So we can, but the good news here is that it's once we shake hands with the perspective that we have, once we really embrace how it is we've been interpreting our world, then we can start to look at how we can shift that perspective so we can be our own best friend. And that's where we can, have some really good effects. This can be a little trickier than it sounds. It sounds pretty upfront, but as you know, many of the things you and I have discussed are simple, not easy. Right? They sound very simple, doesn't mean they're easy. And so there's something called maladaptive beliefs. And psychologists call maladaptive beliefs things that have outlived their usefulness. They're a belief that may have helped you in the past, or maybe never, but you've got it, and it's kind of operational, running in the background. This belief that's no longer serving you.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, biochemically speaking, if you puncture that maladaptive belief, If you meet it, greet it, puncture it, call it out, you actually get an uptick in interferon, a downturn in those pro-inflammatory cytokines we were talking about. And the genes that would come to your rescue for cancer get upregulated. So that's just from puncturing a maladaptive belief. So it's worthwhile to do the digging. It is a little tricky. These can be subtle to track, but it's worth it. So sometimes behind the way we're reacting to certain events, it could be with some of these maladaptive beliefs. Now, it doesn't mean that we're ignoring negative thoughts. And I think that's important. We're really actually inviting them to look at them and to do something with them. Because what if the negative thought is that you should be getting a second or third opinion? And that could be a proactive stance. It might make you feel uncomfortable, but it could save your life.
Yes.
You know, we could have negative thoughts, but underneath it, we might need better boundaries, or we might need to upgrade our friendships. So some of these negative thoughts can lead us to in productive ways, but the maladaptive beliefs can be a little more insidious.
Yeah.
I could give you an example if
Yes,
you want me to.
Yes.
An embarrassing story about my husband and myself, but I think it kind of showcases the idea of a maladaptive belief and how the limbic brain works. We like to hike, and we've never been to, and we love national parks, and we've never been to Death Valley. So I packed a duffel bag for the long weekend, and we're in a Jeep outside of Vegas in a snowstorm. And of course, we all know Death Valley is the hottest place on earth, right?
Yep.
I turned to my husband, and we both asked each other in the same exact moment, did you pack a sweater? And neither of us had packed a sweater. So of course I knew this couldn't be my fault. So I immediately grabbed fedoras in my duffel and looked at the temperature chart, which we had both checked before we packed. And I have a slide of this in my workshops because it's perfectly clear. One glance at that temperature chart, and you know in February in the desert that it can get cold. But so we had to just face the fact that we wore everything we brought every single day. And when we came home, everyone was teasing us, like, what's wrong with you guys? You know, don't you, Bruce Talley, a great friend of ours, said, don't you watch any cowboy movies? It gets cold in the desert at night, right? So people from California, like yourself, say, well, Death Valley is a land of extremes. Extreme temperature. It's not just the hottest place on earth, it's a land of extremes. So we were really laughing at ourselves and wondering what's up with this. What's up with it? We knew what was up with it. The limbic brain will bypass facts every single time in preference of your beliefs. All facts, it doesn't care what it sees. It's a little bit like funhouse mirrors. You know, you might be looking in one of those funhouse mirrors, and your brain might be buying into that. It's because what are we believing? And so this is a silly example, you know, you're out there in Death Valley, so what, you're cold. But what are we believing about our health? What are we really believing about treatment? A woman came to us, again, when I was getting well, her oncologist referred us because she should have been improving. She was young, healthy, the chemo was a perfect match for her, and she was declining significantly. So she came to us and we talked to her about her feelings about her doctor. She loved him. We asked if she'd done research on her treatment. She had. She believed in her treatment. She believed in her doctor. And so we were really looking for what's the issue here. So we had her draw a picture and with crayons of herself with the tumor and the treatment. And sure enough, the tumor was colored all black and the chemotherapy was black. So how she felt about the cancer was the same at a very subliminal level. She felt that chemotherapy was like poison for her. It was the same color as the tumor. So once she could see how she had drawn this, she was really able to get underneath it and come up with a positive image of the chemotherapy, and she did great. So sometimes what our conscious mind is believing with what we've read or what we think is a little different than our subconscious. Just like my husband and I had checked that temperature chart and didn't pack a sweater. So we really want to find out what we're truly believing that's kind of underneath everything. And so using some of these tricks and tools, drawing pictures, written exercises, can help us get in touch with some of these maladaptive beliefs and help us to adopt a reference that's more in our best interest.
You recommend some written exercises. What are some of them that can help us?
Well, when we're looking at these beliefs, I think one of the things, and we were just talking about stress, we might as well pull those together. It just so happens that Harvard, Mayo Clinic have found that something called explanatory style is predictive of longevity. Now, these are decades long studies. They're longitudinal studies that they're continuing over decades. And they have shown us that this idea of explanatory style is incredibly powerful. And this means it's the way we explain the events of our lives to ourselves. In particular, the bad events. Okay, so they're very interested in how we're interpreting these so-called negative events of our lives. So when we're facing a challenge, we need to know how we're interpreting that. And so I often encourage people to write faster than they can censor themselves, to really get it out so that you're not trying to make this narrative perfect. You know, we can all construct some kind of perfect narrative. We don't want that. We want the maladaptive beliefs. So we're looking for the holes, right? So writing faster than we can think can expose some of the areas where we can upgrade our narrative. And that way we can look at what we've written and we can kind of dissect it or unpack it for survivor traits.
And what are survivor traits?
Oh,
I would love to know, what are the survivor traits, especially, coming from you and what you do.
Oh, I love these. I love this topic. Kelly McGonigal at Harvard has kind of put a fresh spin on this with some of the ways we can see that the way we interpret stress and how it changes what's happening biochemically. But for me, Rahe and Holmes, back in the 1950s, these were a couple of docs, a couple of psychiatrists. They called thousands of medical charts, and they came up with a list of life events, good and bad. Birth of a baby, relocation, marriage, death of a parent, divorce, etc. Just the stuff we experience with life. And each event was given a particular numerical value. And if the total exceeded a particular threshold in 12 months, in a 12-month period of time, they found the likelihood of becoming seriously ill was so high that one test actually cemented the relationship between stressful life event and serious illness. So this test just went viral. All Reader's Digest, print media, doctors' offices, and it's like, well, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Well, poor you had a really high, high numbers there. So no one, there wasn't anything to fix this with. But in the 80s, psychologists became curious about a subset of folks who, despite high numbers on that scale, did not become sick. And they thought, let's see if they're different, if there's something about them that's different.
Yes.
And there was. It turns out that they had a collection of traits that researchers dubbed the 3 C's for control, commitment, and challenge. And what this meant was that regardless of the tragic circumstances or the things that had happened, they were able to look at the situation as a turning point rather than an end point. So they were able to see it as a challenge It might even be post-traumatic growth. Can I be a better person? How can I attach to my value system
Yes.
through this challenge? Is there a way I can find more meaning in the suffering that I'm experiencing right now? So challenge was profound. The other was commitment. And while you and I have talked about how altruism is beneficial for our immune system, this was different. Commitment in this case was not commitment to a cause. It was commitment to the self. Yeah. So we really are looking at upgrading this idea of self-care. We always say we have to love others as ourselves,
Yep.
So how are we loving ourselves? We have to really look at what is the commitment I'm making to myself. And I've known, many people I've worked with who've used a diagnosis as an opportunity to upgrade that commitment to
Yes.
themselves.
I'm one of them.
I love it. I love it. And the results can be profound. So it's challenge, commitment, and the final C is control. And this isn't control in the sense that we're controlling other people. It's about a sense of self-mastery that despite the external circumstances of our lives, we are feeling this sense of inner strength and sense of self-mastery that goes far beyond our circumstances. And so these three C's were powerful and protective. What we didn't know for quite some time, psychologists believed that either you had these traits or you didn't. But fortunately for people like myself, I'm not naturally stress hardy. We found that you could adopt these traits and get the same immunoprotective benefits as those who came by these traits naturally. So just revisiting your conversation in your mind, how you're speaking to your best friend, or the written exercises, looking underneath that narrative for how can I upgrade these three C's. We might be demonstrating them really well in one area of our life.
Mm-hmm.
Another area of our life could really need some tweaking.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. So it's a good thing to think about, like these three C's, you know what I mean? Like, am I doing this? That's amazing. Just even for people who have just been diagnosed as well, to look at things differently. We have the power to do that.
That's right. And so when we shift it up, it kind of changes our biochemistry. So it really is helping us to experience the pharmacy that's in our mind in a more direct way, while actually helping us to live our best life, which fits your theme of thriving. I think these three C's go really well with that.
That's awesome. And I'm going to start using shifting up. It's like another word, another way of saying level up. Like, let's shift up.
I like that. I do. I'm going to steal that. Shift up.
So thank you for that. I know you've met many survivors. And so I want to know, do you have an example of someone who used the three C's?
Oh, yes. Many examples. And I think one stands out for me. And I was speaking at an event about this topic, your mind is medicine, or turning stress into strength. And there was a woman on the front row, really petite little lady, and she was just nodding so vigorously that I interrupted myself and asked if she would share what was on her mind. And she did. She said that she had been diagnosed with widespread metastatic cancer, and that despite chemo and radiation, things had stayed about the same. Every time she saw her doctor, she was worried. She'd say, please just tell me how long I have to live. And finally, one day, he took me by the hand, led me to a room, sat me down, and he said, let me give you a piece of advice. Go out and live your life. Do all the things you've wanted to do. Go and live. And she told me that was 7 years ago, and that she had been doing just that ever since. And I think it's a great example because it's when the unthinkable happens As Kathleen Brahoni says, it's the tornado at your door. It's a lump in your breast, the illness of a child, it's lipstick on his collar. And that's when we're called out of our habitual responses to a new vantage point, to really examine our perspective. And when we change that up, we're really called to investigate on a deeper level the meanings we're holding in the present. It also reminds me, of course, the biggest example of all of this is Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist, neurologist, in World War II, imprisoned in 3 concentration camps, including Auschwitz. He lost his home, his practice, every member of his immediate family, with the exception of his sister Stella. And it's powerful because what he explains is that individuals who could find meaning in suffering, coupled with high self-worth, were able to withstand some of the disease and deprivation of that experience. So when we think about his work in logotherapy, we're really not shying away from hard conversations. We're not backing up against a harsh reality. We're actually running to meet it, to find out how we can upgrade that experience. What new meaning can we bring home? That's what really, I think, is anchoring for each one of us is, regardless of the hurry and worry, how can we come home to, the beautiful, sweet air we might be breathing, the goodness that's around us in each and every moment of our lives.
So this is how you turn stress into strength and use your mind as medicine.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me and letting me do this with you today.
Of course. Thanks so much. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
To access Brenda's free resource guide, click in the description box below and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.